You have 10 minutes to pack a bag. That's how my mother greeted the news. My father didn't speak. He just pointed at the door. I was 17 years old, in 11th grade, and holding the ultrasound photo of my son. I, Chloe, stood in the marble foyer of our immaculate house in Charlotte, North Carolina, trembling. The cold, polished surfaces of our home seemed to reflect the frigid disapproval of my parents. My father, Robert, 47, real estate broker, viewed the pregnancy not as a life event, but as a catastrophic business failure. My mother, Susan, 45, high school principal, saw it as a threat to her professional reputation. "You have ruined your life, but you will not ruin ours," Robert declared, his voice surgical and devoid of paternal warmth. "The scandal will affect my clients. It will affect your mother's position. We will not be associated with this liability." Susan grabbed a garbage sack and tossed it at my feet. "Take what you need for a week. You will not give birth in this house. You will not embarrass us with your poor choices. We are closing this account." My entire existence was reduced to a financial burden. 10 minutes later, I stood on the curb with a worn backpack, a sack of clothes, and the life of my son, Ethan, growing inside me. The porch light snapped off, and the deadbolt locked with a decisive thud that severed every thread of familial connection. My father's last words, delivered through the closed door, were a final, chilling statement. "You are no longer our daughter, and you will not receive a single cent from us. Go handle your problem." Homeless, terrified, and utterly alone, I looked up at the perfect, dark windows of the house they chose over me. In that freezing moment, the fear was replaced by a burning, resolute vow. They wanted a liability. I would become an asset. I would build a fortress for Ethan and myself, brick by hard-earned brick. A fortress so financially strong that Susan and Robert would never again have the power to take anything from me. The silence of the world outside their door was deafening. Kicked out at 17 in 11th grade, I, Chloe, spent the first night on a cold bus bench in Charlotte, North Carolina. The fear was paralyzing, but the tiny life of my son, Ethan, inside me, was the only thing that kept me moving. My parents, Susan and Robert, had successfully stripped me of everything, but they couldn't take my resolve. I quickly found a place at a local youth shelter where the grim reality of my situation hit. I realized my lack of education and my pregnancy meant I had zero value in their financial world. My immediate focus became survival. I enrolled in night classes to finish my high school diploma and found 2 minimum wage jobs, one cleaning a bakery at 4 a.m. and another washing dishes late at night. When Ethan was born, the difficulty multiplied. I moved into a subsidized studio apartment, a place with chipped paint and threadbare carpets, but it was ours. Every moment was a calculation. I lived by the numbers. $8 an hour at the bakery, $7.50 at the diner. Every dollar was split between formula, rent, and childcare. The contrast with my parents' life was brutal. They lived in a world of manicured lawns and college funds. I lived in a world where a broken washing machine meant disaster. Yet the memory of their cold rejection became my constant fuel. One night, exhausted and rocking and crying Ethan, I made him a sacred promise. I whispered the vow into his tiny ear. "I will never, ever be dependent on anyone again, and you will never, ever have to beg anyone for security. The life we build will be one they can never touch, question, or take away." The skill I picked up at the bakery, a knack for perfecting the complex, delicate process of laminated dough and high-end wedding cakes, was my only non-monetary asset. It wasn't just a job, it was my escape route. I saw a market for luxury cakes that didn't exist in my area. That small skill, born out of necessity when my family abandoned me, was about to become the foundation of the empire they would one day covet.
My initial years were defined by survival, fueled by minimum wage jobs in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the fierce need to protect Ethan. But my job cleaning a bakery had given me an unexpected education. I, Chloe, realized that while my parents, Susan and Robert, valued white-collar professions, true untouchable wealth lay in ownership. The skills I learned out of necessity, perfecting complex pastries and understanding kitchen efficiency, were my true, non-monetary asset. At 20, armed with my GED and 2 years of savings, I took my calculated risk. I rented a tiny, run-down commercial kitchen space using my entire savings, $3,500, and launched a boutique catering service specializing in high-end, custom wedding cakes and intricate desserts. I named the venture the Golden Spoon, a subtle, sarcastic nod to the affluent life my parents had thrown me out of. There was no margin for error. My business model was brutal. Work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and pour every cent back into the business. I could not afford a loan, nor would I ever ask anyone for help. This was Ethan's inheritance, built entirely on my sacrifice. I used the $3,500 not only for rent and ingredients, but also for a used commercial oven and a refrigeration unit. The business plan was simple: charge luxury prices for artisanal quality that the corporate catering services in Charlotte couldn't match. Every order was a promise to Ethan. By age 22, the business was profitable enough for me to quit the dishwashing job and hire my first employee. I had moved us out of the subsidized studio and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment that I owned outright, the very first brick in the fortress. In those early years, the thought of my parents, the principal, and the real estate broker kept me going. They thought I would fail. They thought I would come crawling back, proving their cruel calculation of my liability correct. Instead, I was building an empire on the exact skill set I was forced to learn when they ejected me. My success wasn't loud or boastful. It was silent, slow, and rooted in the unwavering resolve that my son would never know the cold finality of a slammed door. I was building a brand known for celebration and joy, the very things they had ruthlessly denied me. The 22-year timeline of their absence was nearly complete, and the stage was set for the final, devastating confrontation.
The passing of 22 years did not soften the memory of that cold night in Charlotte, North Carolina. It solidified my resolve. I, Chloe, now 39, was no longer the frightened girl on the street. I was the founder and CEO of the Golden Spoon, a regional catering giant with 12 thriving kitchen centers across 4 states. My initial $3,500 investment had metastasized into an enterprise valued in the tens of millions. My business, born out of the shame my parents tried to inflict, now specialized in high-end corporate events, galas, and luxury weddings. The very events my father, Robert, frequented as a real estate broker and where my mother, Susan, would have presided as a principal. My reputation was impeccable, my name synonymous with financial success and quality, publicly documented in local business journals. The greatest success was Ethan. At 22, he was a junior in college, studying finance. Exactly the kind of trajectory my parents had always demanded. He didn't know the full story of his chaotic birth, only that his mother had worked tirelessly to ensure his security. He was the center of my fortress. He was loved, secure, and had never been subjected to the judgment or conditional love of my biological family. The vow I whispered to him on that tired sofa was fulfilled 10 times over. My personal life was as secure as my business. I owned a contemporary home in the most exclusive part of Charlotte, a house far larger and more architecturally significant than the one Robert had valued only for its superficial appearance. The property was purchased entirely with business funds. It was an asset free of any emotional debt. For 22 years, their silence was the price of their choice. They had erased me. I had become successful. I never contacted them, and they never once attempted to apologize or check on their grandson, Ethan. Their self-centered silence was the quiet tax I paid for my freedom. That silence was about to be broken. A series of cryptic inquiries began filtering through my corporate office, first from a former colleague of Robert's, then from a distant cousin. The news was simple. Robert's real estate business had collapsed during an economic downturn, and Susan's pension was tied up in failed investments. The house they loved more than their daughter, the house where I was ejected, was in foreclosure. They wanted back in the ledger, and they wanted everything I had built.
For 22 years, the silence from Susan and Robert was absolute.
I, Chloe, built my multi-million-dollar catering empire, the Golden Spoon, on the foundation of that betrayal. I had successfully excised them from my life, and that was the currency of my peace. The silence shattered, not with an apology, but with a series of frantic, poorly disguised calls to my corporate office in Charlotte. My administrative assistant, trained to screen for harassment, finally flagged a desperate email. Chloe, this is your father, Robert. I need to speak to you about a critical family financial matter. It's an emergency. Please call me back on my personal line. I researched their public records with the cold precision of a CEO sizing up a failing acquisition. The results were devastatingly satisfying. The perfect suburban house, the one they chose over me, was in foreclosure, due to be auctioned in 60 days. Robert's real estate business had imploded, and his last major investment had wiped out Susan's retirement savings. The arrogance of their youth had metastasized into the ruin of their old age. They were no longer the pristine principal and the successful real estate broker. They were a pair of terrified, financially bankrupt people clinging to the edge of ruin. Their biggest asset was about to be liquidated, and they had nowhere to go. I returned the call from my private office line, a world away from the cold payphone where I once called shelters. Chloe, thank God. Robert's voice was high-pitched, all the smooth arrogance gone. There was no mention of the 11th grade, the pregnancy, or the cold night. We are facing an urgent financial crisis. We need your help to save the house. You have a business worth, what is it now? Tens of millions? The audacity was breathtaking. They hadn't called to apologize for 22 years of absence or to inquire about the son they rejected. They called to demand a piece of the fortress I built because they abandoned me. I was their emergency fund, their last viable asset. I agreed to meet them, not out of mercy, but to ensure the final confrontation was on my territory and my terms. Me, Chloe, agreed to meet Susan and Robert at my corporate headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. This was a calculated move. Their confrontation had to be on my territory, a physical representation of the fortress I built without them. They arrived looking strained and defeated. They were ushered through the gleaming lobby of the Golden Spoon, past framed newspaper articles detailing my expansion, past the meticulous, professional staff, all of whom called me Ms. Last Name with respect. They saw the value of the enterprise they had rejected. The shock in their eyes, far deeper than the shock of my pregnancy 22 years ago, was palpable. We sat in my executive conference room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Robert, the former real estate broker, finally delivered the demand. He didn't lead with apology, he led with entitlement. Chloe, we need $250,000, he stated, his voice regaining a sliver of its old arrogance. The bank will liquidate the house next month. We need that amount to clear the default and settle some urgent tax liens from my business collapse. It's an investment, really, to protect the family asset. My mother, Susan, added tearfully, "It's the only home we have, Chloe. You have 12 catering centers. You can afford this. It's the least you can do for your family." I leaned back, keeping my expression neutral, contrasting their desperation with my composure. $250,000, I repeated, letting the large number hang in the air. 22 years ago, when I was 17 and pregnant with Ethan, I needed far less than that. I needed a single night of shelter, or perhaps the cost of a down payment on a cheap, reliable car to get to my minimum wage jobs. I pulled out a small, laminated slip of paper, a receipt I had kept for 22 years. The total cost of my move-in deposit on that subsidized studio apartment was $550. You ejected me for being a $550 liability. Now you are asking the person you abandoned to pay a $250,000 ransom to save your reputation. The silence was deafening. They had asked for everything, and I had just given them the first taste of the price.
My statement
contrasting their $250,000 ransom demand with the $550 I needed 22 years ago, had momentarily stunned Robert and Susan. They realized I wasn't just wealthy. I was cold, calculated, and legally prepared. The old arrogance was replaced by fear. Susan, the former principal, switched tactics, trading financial jargon for emotional leverage. "Chloe, please, we are your parents. We understand we made mistakes, but we are family. You wouldn't want to see your own mother and father homeless, would you? What about Ethan? He has a right to know his grandparents. You shouldn't deny him that connection." The mention of Ethan, now 22 and in college, was the final line they should never have crossed. For 22 years, they had rejected the existence of their grandson, viewing him only as the reason for their public shame. Now they were trying to use him as a chip to win a $250,000 loan. My composure finally broke, not with hysteria, but with a quiet, lethal intensity. "Don't you dare bring Ethan into this," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. "He is the only thing I built for love, not spite. You threw me out because of him. You never once sent a card, asked if he was safe, or inquired if he was even alive for 22 years. You gave up the right to be his grandparents the moment you slammed that door on a pregnant 17-year-old. I stood up, ending the meeting. "I will not give you the $250,000, and you will never use my son as leverage again. You need to understand the terms of your abandonment. You severed the parental tie, and you certainly severed the grandparent tie." I watched as Robert slumped, defeated. They had failed to appeal to my business sense. The loan was too risky, and failed to appeal to my emotions. Their guilt was worthless. I knew they would be back, because they had nowhere else to go. I had the only viable solution to save their house, and I was preparing the final, devastating counteroffer that would extract the ultimate price, their dignity.
Chloe, knew Susan and Robert would return. They had nowhere else to go. Their desperation for the $250,000 to save their house, the financial asset they valued more than their daughter, was now the ultimate leverage in my hands. They were facing public financial ruin and impending homelessness. They called the next day, their voices stripped of arrogance, replaced with raw pleading. They didn't ask for a loan. They asked for any solution. "We just need to save the house, Chloe," Robert whispered. "We'll sign anything. We'll pay you back. Just stop the foreclosure." I didn't offer a loan. I offered a purchase, a transaction that was clean, final, and entirely on my terms. I will not lend you $250,000. I will, however, buy the house from you immediately for its full market value. This transaction will pay off the bank, clear your tax liens, and leave you with a substantial sum of liquid cash to restart your lives. Their immediate relief was audible, but I quickly delivered the non-negotiable price, the true currency of my revenge. This purchase comes with two conditions. They are non-negotiable, and they will be legally binding. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, ensuring they absorb the full gravity of the terms. Condition 1, the public record of betrayal. You will sign a notarized document detailing the exact circumstances of my departure 22 years ago, that you ejected me at age 17 while I was pregnant with Ethan to protect your professional reputations. This document will be kept in my legal archives, but you must acknowledge the original sin. Condition 2, the permanent exile of the grandson. You will sign a legal agreement permanently waiving any and all rights to contact or communicate with my son Ethan now or ever in the future. He is off limits. You cannot use him as a financial, social, or emotional tool again. They were forced to trade their last vestiges of dignity and the relationship with the grandson they rejected for financial solvency. The fortress was complete. I would save their financial lives, but I would ensure the public record and my son's life were entirely protected from their toxic presence. They agreed to the terms.
The atmosphere in the attorney's office was glacial. I, Chloe, sat across the table from Susan and Robert. They were there not as my parents, but as two desperate sellers executing the final, devastating terms of their financial rescue. My lawyer,
a stone-faced professional, laid out the 3 key documents on the table: the house purchase agreement, the legal sale of their home in Charlotte to me at market value, saving them from foreclosure and providing them with substantial liquidity; the grandson's exile, the notarized waiver of grandparental rights to Ethan, legally forbidding any attempt at contact now or in the future; the original sin, the affidavit of circumstances of departure, detailing the exact shameful truth of my expulsion 22 years ago. Robert, the former real estate broker, stared at the final document, the confession of why they chose reputation over me. He picked up his pen, his hand shaking violently. "Chloe, this affidavit, it's humiliating. It states we chose to kick our pregnant daughter out of the house in 11th grade to protect our professional reputations. Do you intend to make this public?" "That document is my insurance policy," I replied, my voice hard and even. "It serves as the definitive legal record of your betrayal. If you or Susan ever contact me, Ethan, or my company again, that document becomes public record. You must acknowledge the original sin before you receive the funds to save your financial life." Susan, tears streaming down her face, looked pleadingly at me one last time. "Please, Chloe, don't take Ethan away." "You took him away 22 years ago," I countered. "You simply delayed the paperwork." They signed. One by one, Robert and Susan signed the purchase agreement, the waiver for their grandson, and the confession of their cruelty. The legal transaction was complete. The house was now legally mine, and they were officially and permanently excised from my life and Ethan's. The entire process, driven by their initial demand for $250,000, had cost them their dignity and their relationship with the only person who offered them solvency. They left the office with a cashier's check that saved them from homelessness, but the look on their faces was the profound emptiness of total defeat.
The day the funds were wired and the legal documents were filed, the air in Charlotte felt lighter. I, Chloe, stood in my gleaming corporate headquarters, the physical embodiment of the fortress I built, and closed the 22-year ledger of abandonment. My parents, Susan and Robert, had received their rescue funds, preventing their public foreclosure. But they paid the ultimate price, their dignity and the permanent loss of the grandson they never knew. Their initial sin was choosing reputation and financial comfort over their pregnant 17-year-old daughter. Their final sin was attempting to use the success I built without them as a lifeline for their own failures. They taught me that family love was conditional. I taught them that financial justice is absolute. I didn't need the money back, but I needed the affidavit of circumstances, the document where they admitted they ejected me to protect their real estate broker and principal reputations. That affidavit wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting Ethan from their eventual attempt to rewrite history. They can never tell him they lost touch or that I kept him away. The truth is now a legal, notarized fact. The biggest reward was the waiver of grandparental rights. They were permanently exiled from the life of the son they rejected. They lost their chance at a future because they failed the test of the past. My life is now defined by unconditional love. The love for my son, Ethan, who is thriving in college, and the love for my work, the Golden Spoon. The business, born from a need for $550 for a studio apartment deposit, now provides security for hundreds of employees. The house they loved more than me is now a rental property in my growing portfolio. It is no longer a symbol of my shame, but a quiet, powerful testament to my financial strength. I am free. Free from guilt, free from debt, and free from the cruel conditional love of two people who chose an image over a child. I closed the door on them forever, just as they had closed the door on a scared, pregnant girl 22 years ago.